Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Firefighters Podcast, where we seek to develop, inspire, and motivate the world of the emergency services operator through a series of wide-ranging conversations. Now, before we go any further, just hit that rate, follow, or subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening to. It's a key performance indicator for us and helps us reach even more people. Now, here's what we've got for you today. Hey folks, this one is a little bit of a one-off, maybe tester episode, and we get asked a lot about personal development on the podcast, because basically the whole podcast is all built around personal development, if we're honest, isn't it? But in the recent episode that we just did with Jason Coy, we spoke about this concept of humble, hungry, smart, and reflected on a load of books. And I was actually discussing it in a recent personal development session, or a recent sort of leadership development session with some of the people that are in development with me. And one of them asked, kind of, where do you find time to do all this reading? You keep bringing out these books and this, that, and the other. And I recognize that we all utilize time a little bit differently. And also, we should just kind of crowdsource that knowledge, because that's where the best conversations come from. Just because you read the book doesn't mean you wrote it, doesn't make it your idea, but does mean if we can pass it around and maybe other people can take some stuff from it. So this one is about that book. And really why I thought it was appropriate and maybe give some benefit to people is because it's kind of about how to become a teammate that your crew can really rely on. So as I mentioned in my recent conversation with Jason, we spoke several times about personal development, about ownership, and the kind of people that strong teams need. And one of the books that came up was The Ideal Team Player, Patrick Lencioni. I read it maybe like 8 years ago, and I've gone back to it a couple of times. I find it a really, really interesting one. It's one of those books that the ideas I take from it, I've certainly used in my own personal development. So I wanted to do a short, and this is a short one as you'll see from the runtime of the episode, but slightly deeper dive into this framework. That's, I think, simple enough to remember, but useful enough to maybe change how we think about our teams, maybe even how we recruit, and how we develop as individuals and lead people. So the idea of this is around the strongest team players consistently demonstrate these 3 virtues. They're humble, they're hungry, and they're smart. Now, an important caveat, I suppose, is that it's not scientifically validated personality test in any way, shape, or form. It's not a clinical assessment, and it's not a necessarily reliable way of placing every person you know into like a nice, neat little box like we've done with, or we've tried to do with like strength builders in the past, or Myers-Briggs, or anything like that. It's kind of a practitioner framework, but for me, a framework doesn't have to explain everything to be useful. Sometimes its value is in that it gives us some shared language for noticing behavior, maybe discussing our development and asking better questions. And I think this one transfers really well into the fire service, and I think it can improve how we recruit people, like I've said, how we can develop people, and maybe how we can maybe help explain why some teams perform consistently while others remain trapped sometimes in ego, conflict, or certainly apathy, which maybe some listeners can relate to. It is beyond a privilege to be able to bring the Firefighters Podcast to you, and we are so grateful for every single person that supports, listens, shares, and follows our journey. And to help us keep doing it, create more, reach more guests internationally, and make the podcast sustainable, we're asking for you to help. And to do this, we've set up a Patreon page. By joining our Patreon community, you will get access to every single full episode archive we have ever made. Now, hundreds and hundreds of key documents that we've got in there on fire behavior, firefighter health, cancer risks, incident debriefs, and so much more. So if you feel like you want to join the Patreon crew and help us make this possible, head to patreon.com/TFFPC or check the link in any episode podcast notes. Most importantly, I think it gives every one of us a bit of a mirror. I always say, we like pointing fingers, we don't necessarily like pointing thumbs. So before we use these 3 words to diagnose everybody else, which firefighters love diagnosing everybody else except themselves, we really should ask, how humble am I? How hungry am I? And how smart am I in a way that I am working with people? So let's pull those apart. So first, let's begin with humility. Doesn't mean lacking confidence. It does not mean necessarily making yourself smaller, hiding your competence, or pretending not to know something that you definitely do know. A humble person can definitely be confident, They can still be assertive and definitely be highly capable, in my opinion. I think the difference is that their ego doesn't need to dominate the room. Do you know what I mean? We all know those people, right? Humble people can share credit. They can admit mistakes. They can remain open to learning. And they put the team's success above their own sort of need for validation, need for recognition. In the fire service, humility might be an experienced firefighter taking a probationer's observation really seriously. It might be an officer saying during a debrief, my first decision was wrong and this is what I missed or this is what I'd do differently. It might be an instructor changing what they teach because there's better evidence has emerged. That was certainly something that I had to start doing or wanted to start doing when I recognized some of my behaviors when I first joined as an instructor. Because, instructors should be able to change and adapt instead of protecting an idea simply because they were taught it 20 years ago. Humility keeps us teachable. I think it's probably the biggest factor with this. And it matters in high-risk professions like ours because rank and experience can improve judgment, but they can also challenge our ability to be challenged, if you know what I mean. They make being challenged more difficult. Safest team is not one where nobody questions the leader. It's one where people can raise a concern and the leader is secure enough to hear it. Aviation is a great place that we see a lot of this. They learn that lesson through tragedy. Something I've also spoken about before is this crew resource management book called Black Box Thinking. Spoken about that a few times. Developed partly because technically capable crews were still failing through poor communication, weak challenges, and leaders that didn't accept input from people they perceived as less than. The lesson for us is pretty straightforward. Competence without humility can silence the information that you most need. So that's humility. Second one that we speak about is hunger. I've got stay hungry tattooed across my shoulders. You don't have to be that cringy, but hungry people possess a serious internal drive. They do not consistently need somebody behind them, pushing them to train, to improve, to contribute. You don't want to be a boulder team or a wheelbarrow team. The whole wheelbarrow joke only works when pushed. You don't want to be a boulder team where, if you don't keep pushing, the whole thing just rolls downhill. People that are hungry look for what he's doing, take responsibility, and carry their share of the work, sometimes more than their share of the work. But hunger shouldn't be confused with ambition, which I think it often is. Some people are extremely ambitious, but only hungry for promotion or attention or status. I think genuine hunger, as I interpret it, is not simply a desire to move upwards, it's a desire to get better and contribute more. There is a subtle difference there for me. Now, of course, I appreciate this is a solo episode, so there's no one here to challenge my thoughts, but that's how I interpret it. It's the firefighter who practices a skill because they know it is not yet good enough. And you know that I always say when people go to bed at night, when you place your head on your pillow, you'll know if you didn't really give it all. You'll know if you're not where you need to be yet. And that's not about self-deprecating and woe is me. It's just about the desire to practice because you know it's not good enough. Maybe it's the crew manager who prepares properly for a training session instead of recycling the same old tired drill. Shameless promotion for Drill Book, once again, where we encourage people to diversify their thought and find different drills, different exercises, different ways to improvise training, to have a little bit of diversity of thought. Maybe it's a senior leader who continues learning even when nobody above them is checking. I'm impressed so much when I see a leader speaking and they don't fully understand, or they don't fully grasp what they're talking about, but they're seeking knowledge, they're seeking answers, like they bring a new concept, they bring a talk they've read, a book they've read, maybe a new study they've been looking into, and they have ideas and they have things that they don't understand, and they're trying to explore that conversation live in the moment. Like we always say, the podcast is learning out loud, because we're not coming here pretending to have all the answers. We're coming here to learn with other people that know more than me. And, for you guys and girls, it's learning more than what you know from the guests that we have on. That's the whole point.
I have been wearing Gore-Tex for nearly 2 decades on the front line, working in hostile environments, tackling challenging incidents from firefighting to water incidents and in urban search and rescue environments. Gore-Tex have a well-earned reputation for protecting professionals in the fire and emergency services through their family of highly innovative, waterproof, breathable moisture barriers that exceeds global performance standards and are trusted worldwide. Gore-Tex, going further together.
Hunger asks, what can I improve? What can I contribute? What responsibility can I take? But the fire service needs a warning label on this virtue, I think, because hunger is not recklessness. We sometimes see that when people hear aggressive firefighting or things like that. But we're not talking about unnecessary risk. We're not talking about charging ahead because you want to be seen doing something busy work. Research of firefighters has warned what traits we usually admire, including pride, motivation, commitment, aggressiveness, they can contribute to overconfidence and poor fireground decisions when they're not balanced by discipline and judgment. So the ideal team player, coming back to this Lezioni book, is not hungry for action at any cost. They're hungry for competence, for preparation, for service, and for the right outcome. Agency without alignment is just kind of freelancing, and hunger without any real judgment can definitely be a hazard. So that's those first two concepts. And this third one, and I'm going to try and keep this brief because I said I would. We're at 10 minutes already. The third virtue is smart. In the model that they talk about here, smart doesn't mean academic intelligence. We've spoken on the podcast before about many different ways of being intelligent. One of our previous guests described firefighters as remarkably intelligent people, but just not necessarily academic, because ultimately we are problem solvers. It doesn't mean collecting the most qualifications or quoting the most research or using words with as many syllables as possible that force everybody else to quietly search Google underneath the table. It means being smart with people. Maybe we call this social and emotional awareness. Maybe we call it emotional intelligence. Bit of a buzzword bingo, but smart team players can read a room. They recognize when to challenge, when to support, when to speak, and when to shut up. Sometimes I struggle with that one. I know interrupting is a challenge for me on the podcast. Again, personal development, always ongoing, guys. Smart people can deliver a difficult message without unnecessarily humiliating someone. They notice when a colleague is perhaps withdrawing. They understand that good intent does not guarantee good impact. That really, really matters. Our intent versus our impact, that really matters, I think, in the fire service, because we train and we operate and live basically together on stations. You spend a lot more time with your crews than perhaps you do with your own family. So communication, trust, and judgment directly affect safety. Because you can be technically brilliant and physically capable and incredibly hardworking, but if you constantly damage the people around you, you are not an ideal team player, even though you've just said you're technically brilliant, you're physically capable, you're incredibly hardworking. Doesn't mean you're definitely going to be an ideal team player if you don't have that smart element to you. And it's the thing I wrestle with the most. Honestly, it's the thing, I think that's my biggest development area, has been for years, and I'm still working on it. You are an individual performer creating a team level problem. That is a big problem. And the framework becomes especially useful when one virtue is missing. So that's why they use this 3-pronged effect. Someone who is humble but lacks hunger and people smarts, they might be pleasant, but they're going to be passive. They require constant direction and contribute, honestly, probably very little. Someone who is hungry but lacks humility and awareness becomes that bulldozer. Do you know what I mean? They get things done, but damage relationships and leave everybody else clearing up the cultural wreckage. And usually, with respect, get a promotion. That, honestly, has been my experience at times in the fire service. Not necessarily with everybody, but sometimes that you can be people hungry, competent, and again, lack humility, and they can cause a lot of cultural wreckage. Third option, maybe someone who is smart with people but lacks humility and hunger becomes just a charmer. You know what I mean? They use their social ability mainly to protect themselves. They're also people who demonstrate 2 out of 3, which can equally not be that sweet spot we're looking for. Maybe the humble and hungry person who lacks people smarts, they can be the accidental mess maker. Their intentions are good and they do work hard, but they repeatedly fail to notice their impact on other people. The humble and smart person who lacks hunger becomes a lovable slacker, basically, and we can probably relate to a few of those. They're really pleasant, they're really easy to work with, but other people repeatedly have to compensate for their lack of effort. You're constantly covering for that person because they're just not getting shit done. I think the most dangerous combination may be the person who is hungry and smart, but again, lacks humility. Lencioni calls this the skillful politician. They're definitely driven. They read people really well and they understand how the organization works. They know which projects will be noticed and how to present themselves to senior leaders. But their success is mainly about themselves. They can imitate teamwork, they can perform empathy, and they appear supportive when the right people are watching. Because they often produce visible results. You know what I mean? Organizations may reward them while missing the damage that's being done underneath. And then eventually quieter people just stop contributing. Credit moves upwards while blame moves downwards. And people protect themselves instead of helping the team. Firefighters, police officers, and first responders are now stepping into environments wired with more high voltage than ever before. Everything from electric vehicles to solar panels feeding direct current through compromised structures, overhead power lines, and illicit drugs factories with improvised lethal bypasses. Any single strike in the wrong place in this type of environment can turn things fatal very quickly, and that is exactly why we've partnered with Jafco. You already know who Jafco are. They have been relied upon for decades for sturdy, get-the-job-done equipment, and they are not resting on their laurels. They are evolving to face the challenges first responders are handling today through their insulated tool range. These are purpose-built for the scenarios where contact with hidden electrical hazards isn't just possible, it is increasingly likely. Their insulated tools are engineered for real-world abuse and use, designed to keep firefighters, police officers, and all first responders alive in environments where electrification is outpacing policy, equipment, and training. And you know this. This is the kind of innovation our sector needs and the kind of investment organizations should be stepping up to support if we are serious about protecting first responders from fatal consequences. So a massive thank you to Jafco for backing the podcast and backing the crews on the ground. Go check them out, learn what they're doing, and bring that conversation into your service because this isn't about the future, it's about right now. This is why performance can't be defined only by visible output. Someone who delivers projects while repeatedly damaging trust is not a high performer, and we need to recognize that. They are producing short-term results while creating long-term organizational debt. So, I know I'm at 15 minutes already, so I want you to think about, as we close, how do we use that framework constructively? First, go and have a look for the book, The Ideal Team Player, Patrick Lencioni, and try and use it as personal development. Don't start with a score. Try and start with evidence. Like for humility, ask yourself, when did I last admit a mistake before somebody else exposed it? When did I last change my mind because somebody junior to me or equal to me, whatever your position is at, has better information? Who gets the credit when work goes well? There are 3 questions you can ask yourself. Humility. For hunger, excuse me, ask yourself, what am I developing without being chased? Now, what am I actually working on? Where have I become comfortable? We could probably all point at those if we didn't want to. And what responsibility am I taking rather than waiting to be given it? And then for people smarts, which is a really important one, ask yourself, can I challenge without humiliating somebody? Am I being really conscious about the words that I'm using? Do I notice when my message has not landed? Do people leave interactions with me specifically maybe safer, clearer? Do they feel more capable after interacting with you? Then ask maybe somebody you trust for examples of where you are strong and where you create difficulty in the team. The gap between how you see yourself and how other people experience you may be the most useful information you receive. It's feedback, right? Secondly, think about using the framework with your team, but don't use it as a weapon. Don't use this as an opportunity to point people out and embarrass people. Don't walk into the watch table, the station, and announce that Dave is obviously a bulldozer and Steve is clearly a lovable slacker. Steve is not going to appreciate that. That conversation will go downhill faster than a lead balloon. You know what I mean? Instead, ask the team to define the behaviors maybe. What does humility look like for us on the watch? What does healthy hunger look like for us on the watch? What does being people smart sound like during a drill or a debrief or a disagreement? What behavior do we want more of? What behavior is quietly damaging us? Then try and connect those answers to the real work. Strong teams are built through training, honest feedback, shared standards, debriefs, red teaming, however you want to put it, and difficult work done together. Not by just sticking 3 words on a wall and thinking, hey, we nailed it. Finally. Use it to develop people rather than label them. You know what I mean? I think that's the thing we did with things like Myers-Briggs and stuff in the past. We just used it to label people. It wasn't really development tools as much as they were marketed in that way. A person struggling with humility may need clear feedback and responsibility for helping someone else succeed. Maybe a person who appears to lack hunger might need some clear expectations and meaningful ownership, but they may also be burnt out. They might be disengaged. They might be overlooked or stuck in a role where effort no longer really feels connected to a purpose. You can see this in non-operational roles, especially if someone has been operational before and then moved into a non-operational role. That can be difficult for them. Certainly was for me when I did it. And finally, a person lacking people smarts, they really, really might need some specific, delicate feedback. Radical Candor is another great book about behavior and impact. Improve your communication is nearly useless feedback. Thinking about you interpreted 3 times that the crew stopped contributing gives them something they can work with, maybe something they can work on. These are development gaps, not permanent identities. We need to recognize people can change, people can grow, context can change behaviors. And leaders, which is all of us, should be very cautious about turning an easy framework into a permanent judgment about somebody's character. People change. They really do change. I think they change anyway. Finally, use the model carefully. If you, like Jason, are using it in recruitment and promotion, maybe don't ask candidates to define teamwork, integrity, or leadership, because most people can just produce an acceptable dictionary answer that they're parroting from somewhere else. Ask for evidence. Tell us about a mistake you admitted to before anyone else discovered it. Tell us about a time you're doing the right thing cost you something. Tell us about something maybe you improved without being instructed to do so. Tell us about a time your behavior negatively affected somebody else, and when did you recognize it, and what did you change? Then think about structuring the process. Maybe, in a utopian world, if I was given an opportunity to design something like this, I'd be asking every candidate comparable questions. Agree what strong evidence looks like amongst the people that are assessing this, and then use more than one trained assessor. You've got to score independently and add a realistic task where possible so that people can't practice for this stuff. Otherwise, team fit can become a respectable sounding kind of way of choosing the person who looks, sounds, and thinks most like the panel. And that is not what we're trying to look for at all. You know what I mean? That comes straight away from the diversity and neurodiversity is the bigger point for me that we really are desperate for, I think, in the fire service. Humble must not simply mean quiet. That one is important. Hungry can't just be working excessive hours and sacrificing your well-being to appear committed, which is definitely something I regularly slip back into. And smart people doesn't just mean charismatic, polished people that are good at interviews. That doesn't mean that they're emotionally intelligent, smart people. These expectations, most importantly, must also apply upwards, because just because people have made it through the narrow gap of promotion in a broken or different or dated system, these expectations have got to apply upwards. Senior leaders can't demand humility while protecting their own egos. They can't demand hunger from firefighters while having stopped really developing themselves years ago. We can't claim to be people smart if nobody around us feels safe enough to disagree, which can be a challenge for some senior leaders. Question's not simply whether you work with ideal team players. I think the better question is whether you're becoming one. Where does your ego make it difficult to learn? Where has your hunger faded or maybe become misdirected? Where could you become smarter in the way that you communicate, the way you challenge, and the way you support the people around you? Humble, hungry, smart. 3 simple words. Not a perfect science, like I said at the beginning, not a license to judge everyone else around you. But I thought it was useful, and I thought it'd be something useful to put out as a single episode. Because I think used honestly, these things can be a powerful language for personal development, better recruitment, and stronger teams. So remember, use this framework as a mirror first, then listen to this again. Or better than me, go and listen to the book. You can get it on audiobook as well. Then use it as a conversation. Turn the conversation maybe into some deliberate practice. And because if you can do those things, we can make progress. Because better organizations are not built just through slogans. I think they're not built through slogans at all, actually. I think they're built by people who are willing to examine themselves and take responsibility for their development and become better teammates. Hope this was useful. Give us some feedback. Maybe drop us an email. There's an email somewhere. It's firefighterspodcast@gmail.com. That's like the open one that anyone can send stuff to. Send stuff to that. We'll drop it in the notes below if you think this was useful. If you want to hear a little bit more about this, we're trying to keep them short. This one's going to be sub 30, longer than I intended. We haven't done one of these personal development ones in a while. And it's honestly, like I said, one of the most frequent emails that we get. Would you recommend this? Would you recommend that? What would you recommend? I'd recommend this as a good thing, as a personal development tool. So go and have a look at it. Hope it was useful. Look after yourself, look after each other. Stay humble, stay hungry, stay smart. And try and be the teammate that you'd want to work with. See you next time.
Well, that's it for today, folks. Hope you took a lot away from that episode. We started the Firefighters podcast to develop, inspire, connect, motivate, represent, and most importantly, celebrate the world of incredible emergency services operators and the wider sector through this series of wide-ranging conversations. We really love creating this podcast and bringing it to so many people. Did you know you can also find these on YouTube? We do a lot of video podcasts now. You can head over to our YouTube page and follow, subscribe there. And as a final ask from us, whatever platform you're on, please rate the podcast. It really helps us as a key performance indicator to reach more and more people. I've been your host, Pete Wakefield. This has been the Firefighters Podcast. And wherever you are in the world, please stay safe, be happy, and where possible, please remember and support your firefighters and first responders. I'll see you next time.